Ladies and gentlemen, it's 9 a.m. Welcome. Let us begin. You are going to be with us until 12:30 today, and we're so happy to see so many of you here. Let us start. I have the next slide. Last week, the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, was speaking at the COP29 summit in Baku in Azerbaijan. And in his speech, he made this statement. He said that according to Oxfam, the richest billionaires emit more carbon in an hour and a half than the average person does in an entire lifetime. He said, let me repeat that. According to Oxfam, the richest billionaires emit more carbon in an hour and a half than the average person does in a lifetime. So I want to start by asking you a question. All hundreds of guests who have joined us. Is the statement that I have put up on the screen true or false? Please use the meeting chat to answer the question. Is the statement that we put on the screen true or false? Please go ahead and give us your responses. I'll give you a moment or two. Question, if you're just joining us, is the statement that is currently on the screen true or not? That the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said last week at COP29 in Baku that according to Oxfam, the richest billionaires emit more carbon in 1 hour, in 1.5 hours than the average person does in a lifetime. So let me give you the answer. For what it's worth, the statement is true. Indeed, Antonio Guterres did say this. He said it at the COP summit. And in doing so, he drew on the data that Oxfam provided. But notice something about this slide. The information that he's provided is not subject to any reporting or auditing standards. The people who are making the statement are not auditors. In fact, Antonio Guterres is an unelected, non-political appointment. And he did so at a climate summit. And the organization that he's quoting is not any one of the big global consulting auditing firms, but he is quoting a global charity. This is the essence of the discussion about sustainability. That very large statements that have nothing to do with money, in this case, carbon emissions, are being made and relied upon by very big and important parties. And the majority of attendees at this event believe this. And why is that the case? Because they trust Antonio Guterres, because they trust the United Nations, because they think that COP is a reliable event, and because they think that Oxfam is a reliable charity. And at the heart of sustainability reporting are these questions. We are all going to encounter statements such as the one just made in annual reports, in non-financial reports, made by individuals that we're not accustomed to making these statements. And we're going to be asked as users of these reports, whether we think that they're rational, whether they think they're accurate, or whether we think that they're fair and reliable. And so today's webinar for 3.5 hours is going to take us on a journey through this. What types of information we expect to see, how will we know they are reliable, what kind of ethical standards would apply, and ultimately, how are we going to audit it? Now that everybody has joined, let me welcome you properly. Good morning. My name is Imran. I'm the Standards Director here at the IRBA. This is a very significant event for us, and I hope it's a significant event for you because of the amazing lineup of speakers that we have today. This is really the very best lineup in the world that we could get together for a sustainability event of this nature. I ask you, Take out your notebooks, please, and make notes. If you pay careful attention, you have a very good chance of leaving today's webinar with a really comprehensive understanding of our sustainability landscape. And why is that necessary? Well, the Secretary General also said 2024 is likely to be the hottest year on record. And ESG reporting has never been more critical than at the current moment. We are probably in the final countdown to limit global temperatures, to deal with social issues, to deal with governance issues. And the responsibility has shifted to the accountants and those associated with them in respect of what they report and what they assure. And it is our hope as the IRBA that the professions can genuinely help on this journey. But first, I would like you to join me in welcoming the IRBA CEO. His name is Imre Nagy. He is my boss, and he has been the driving force for over 20 years in the auditing field. And more recently, he has spearheaded a number of the regulatory initiatives within the IRBA in general and in the area of inspections and monitoring. He also plays a global role as chairman of the Audit Committee of the Independent Forum of IFIA, the International Forum for Independent Audit Regulators. It is my pleasure to welcome him and for him to deliver the keynote address first. Imre, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Imran. I really appreciate it. So good morning, distinguished guests and esteemed colleagues. It's really a pleasure to welcome you today to today's webinar hosted by the IRBA. We're very proud of it on the topic of sustainability, the big picture. So let me start by making this statement to say that the pressing need to address climate change, and Imran did a very good introduction. The pressing need to address climate change, social inequalities, and governance challenges are clear indicators that we are at a crucial point in the global movement towards sustainability. So in this regard, the auditing profession has such a vital role to act as champions of good governance, transparency, accountability, assurance in promoting sustainability value creation. In respect of climate change, we are already aware of the UN Climate Change Conference, the one that just happened last week, and we are following that closely, COP29. But I want to refer you to COP26, with its main goal to secure global net zero by mid-century and maintain a maximum of 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming within reach. This journey actually started almost a decade ago, back in December 2015, alongside other countries, where all 54 African countries have also signed the Paris Agreement at COP21 in Paris, France, which is a legally binding international treaty on climate change. So we are in this. We are in this. There is no turning back from my perspective. So why is sustainability so relevant to us today? Well, let's consider how individuals and organizations benefit from sustainability practices. Firstly, it provides a competitive advantage. So companies that prioritize sustainability can gain an edge in the marketplace as consumers and stakeholders become more environmentally conscious. It also gives these companies the ability to unlock capital flow from responsible investors and lenders. Companies risk disinvestment if they ignore sustainability, which is a real risk to companies today. Second one I would like to mention is improved employee retention. Employees, especially younger generation employees who work for sustainable organizations, are often happier, more productive, and they feel more cared for. They also feel a sense of purpose by acting responsibility towards fellow citizens and future generations as part of the social compact. And that's, we know, is really important for younger generations. Thirdly is community benefits. Sustainability engagement can lead to improved quality of life, health, economic benefits, social equity, and environmental stewardship. And we know that is very, very important in today's world. So that brings us today to this webinar, where our focus is to paint a picture of the sustainability landscape. And as Imran said, we hope that we can give you a holistic picture of this landscape today. So in implementing the sustainability reporting standards, let's start with the reporting standards. These standards, we believe, create an enabling an ecosystem that is important for several reasons. Firstly, these standards provide the necessary infrastructure and support for the adoption and effective implementation of sustainability reporting, and of course, to be followed by assurance. It also ensures consistency and comparability in reporting practices across different sectors and regions. For example, the European Union is a major trade partner, which makes interoperability of reporting standards very, very important to enable consistent reporting across multinational companies. It also facilitates the flow of sustainable finance by providing investors with reliable, comparable information. And lastly, it helps in identifying and addressing South Africa and an African specific challenge in sustainability reporting and assurance. So you will see today that there is a nuance towards looking at this also through an African and a South African lens. With regards to the adoption of the mainstream, or also known as the baseline sustainability reporting standards, let me share a few statistics with you. So there's currently about 25 countries representing 50% of global GDP that adopted the International Sustainability Standards Board's IFRS S1 and S2. And we know this standard was already issued in the middle of 2023 last year. This is a significant uptake, also considering that international organizations such as IOSCO are supporting these standards. About 23 countries in Africa are at various stages of adopting the S1 and S2 standards. And by adopting, I mean mandating it in legislation. And this is important, also considering that Africa contributes around 10% of global emissions. South Africa is on its own just transition journey led by the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, as well as the CIPC, and they're considering the adoption of the reporting standards. But for now, in South Africa, we only have voluntary reporting and voluntary assurance available on sustainability reporting. To give you an example, MTN voluntarily adopted the ISSB standard, and more South African companies are following suit, also opting for assurance to enhance credibility. The IRBA is fully committed to playing our part. As the audit regulator and standard setter in South Africa, we are in the process of finalizing our 2025 to 2030 strategy, and therein we have identified the following three main objectives. Firstly, fostering a thriving and sustainable audit profession. Secondly, impactful and meaningful relationships with other regulators and stakeholders, including as it relates to the corporate reporting ecosystem. And lastly, enhancing the IRBA's internal resources, including as it pertains to sustainability assurance. These strategic initiatives confirm our commitment to positioning the auditing profession as a leader on sustainability, including evaluating the implications for market in respect of sustainability reporting and assurance. By strengthening our collective capabilities in the promotion of adoption of the ISSB reporting standards, the auditing profession will play a pivotal role in attracting investment, enhancing decision-making, and contributing to the sustainable growth of our economy. This is because investors and others are increasingly calling for high quality, transparent, reliable and comparable reporting by entities on climate and other environmental, social and governance, also known as ESG matters. This is accompanied by questions regarding assurance thereof, and as well the ethical responsibilities of preparers and assurance practitioners. On the assurance side, let me zoom into that a little bit. The IAASB earlier this month announced that the PIOB, which is the Public Interest Oversight Board, has certified the International Standard on Sustainability Assurance, also known as ISSA 5000. It is titled General Requirements for Sustainability Assurance Engagements, and this is out for final publication. The ISSA 5000 is a principle-based overarching standard suitable for both limited and reasonable assurance engagements on sustainability information, reported across any sustainability topic. It is drafted to work with sustainability information prepared under any suitable reporting framework, including the ones that are already in place and those still under development. So this will shortly be followed, and we're very happy to announce that as the IRBA, in terms of our due processes, in respect of local adoption, we will embark on projects that may be conducted through our Sustainability Standing Committee, and this is envisaged to happen next year. There is one implication to note though. Although there's an emerging tendency for companies to use the same external auditor for their sustainability assurance, the ISSA 5000 standard is profession agnostic, meaning that non-auditors can also provide assurance using the standard. Now, this poses a risk to companies using unregulated service providers to assure their sustainability reports. This risk was also recently flagged by IFAC, calling on local regulators to address the issue in their legislation. And we are addressing this risk with the DTIC and CIPC, and they are indeed aware of it. So for now, companies need to be aware who they appoint, because non-regulated or unregulated service providers might not be able to be held accountable in terms of maybe an audit failure on a sustainability report. On the ethics side, the ISBA in December last year approved the proposed new international ethics standards for sustainability assurance, and the exposure draft contains proposed independent standards for use by all sustainability assurance practitioners, regardless of whether they're auditors, and specific ethical provisions relevant to sustainability reporting and assurance. This will also be adopted by the RBA following adoption or global issuing of the code sometime next year. As we embark on this webinar of learning and collaboration, I encourage you to please engage actively, share your experiences, and consider how you can contribute to building an enabling ecosystem for sustainability reporting and assurance in South Africa. The insights we gain from our stakeholders will be invaluable in shaping our approach and overcoming any challenges that may arise. So before I conclude, may I please call on you to join us in doing the following. Firstly, advocating for sustainability standards. What is needed in South Africa at the moment is a legislated sustainability reporting framework. And this should not be confused by the international standards. This is something that is needed to be enacted in the Companies Act, for example, including a mandated assurance requirement on a mandated sustainability reporting framework. So to give you an idea, hypothetically, we might adopt IFRS S1 and S2, and we might mandate assurance on it. The Companies Act should also nominate or create a mandated regulator of unregulated assurance providers to level the playing field and ensure consistency and accountability in assurance reports. These changes will require amendments to the Companies Act and may include transitional provisions to cater for implementation issues. Secondly, let's engage. Let's engage among each other. Let's engage with our stakeholders. Let's actively engage, including investors, customers, consumers, employees, communities. Let's engage on sustainability issues. And let's seek feedback wherever you're sitting. Let's seek feedback from stakeholders to improve sustainability practices and reporting. Thirdly, let's integrate sustainability into business strategy. For those of you who are not auditors, that are maybe in leadership in business or on boards, let's align sustainability goals and targets with overall business objectives and risk management strategies. Let's integrate sustainability considerations into decision-making processes at all levels of the organization. As I mentioned earlier, companies, especially public companies that do not invest in sustainability, risk disinvestment. This is a real risk for companies. Another point I think we need to focus on is we need to enhance sustainability reporting. I've emphasized this quite a bit. So it's important, even in an environment of voluntary adoption, let's implement sustainability reporting frameworks that are, generally accepted, such as the S1 and S2 standards. Let's develop clear and concise sustainability reports that are reliable, and let's appoint regulated assurance providers for sustainability reports to bolster credibility. Another very important focus area is the fact that we should promote sustainability education, and through education and awareness, and build capacity. Let's share knowledge and best practices with colleagues and peers to upskill and make sure that we know what's going on. Let's keep abreast of the latest developments. Let's build capacity and skills across the entire value chain, starting at the board, leadership, and even staff. We need to invest in training and upskilling. It's likely that companies and large companies will have to invest in a dedicated sustainability team, and it needs to be built up because everybody's scrambling for sustainability capacity and skills. So it is important that, similar to technology and advanced technology, that we invest internally in upskilling existing staff, because there's a big competition in appointing and finding sustainability reporting experts out there. And to do that, let's encourage continuous learning and professional development in sustainability, even in CPD. If you play in the sustainability space, make sure that your CPD addresses this. I'm concluding. Let's strengthen sustainability assurance. Again, let's engage qualified assurance providers such as auditors or registered auditors to assess the reliability and completeness of sustainability information in terms of international assurance standards and international ethics code. Let's collaborate with these assurance practitioners to establish clear scopes and objectives for assurance engagements. And let's provide timely and relevant information to auditors to facilitate their work. By taking these actions, you can contribute and actively contribute to the advancement of sustainability reporting and assurance, driving positive environmental and social impact. We all can make a difference wherever we are. Thank you for your participation in this sustainability webinar. I trust that you will find the webinar insightful, and we are very eager to also hear from you. Thank you. I'm then handing back to, I think it's Imran.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Imre. If I had to summarize your keynote address, I'd say that this is probably the clearest call to action and to quality and collaboration that we have heard IRBA express and this is consistent with the IRBA's new strategy, which will come into effect in April next year. And you have expressed IRBA's firm commitment, and today's webinar is one great example of that. So on behalf of everyone, Mr. Nagi, thank you very much for being here. We'll move on to the next part of the agenda, where I get to introduce the host for today's event. Her name is Jyoti Vallabh, and Jyoti is coming on screen now. This is Jyoti's biography. She's a partner at Deloitte. She specializes in ESG assurance. She's also the acting chair of our Sustainability Standing Committee here at the IRBA. Jyoti, we have now over 220 attendees on the webinar. We have an exciting 2 hours left ahead of us, where there'll be a series of panels and presentation discussions. If Jyoti comes up on screen and we will all be able to see her, I can hand over to you. Jyoti is the real expert on this topic, and so we're very honored that we have an expert like this who has helped us plan today's event and is going to take us through the event and help introduce some of the panelists and esteemed speakers. Jyoti, I'm going to turn off my camera now and hand over to you, and I will rejoin at the end of the day to summarize the meeting. I encourage everyone, please don't leave us today. This is really an opportunity to leave instead with a comprehensive landscape on sustainability. Thank you for being here and welcome.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our wonderful webinar for today. As Imran and Imre have said, it's going to be a very exciting event. I'm thrilled to be your program director for today, and I look forward to engaging with all of you as we progress. This is a topic that is very close to my heart, and it's something that I learn something new in every day, and I hope you will too today. We have an impressive array of speakers, panelists, presentations, and videos to share with you, all of whom are impressive credentials, deep experience in the areas, and I'm sure will provide us insights that will enhance our knowledge. Just as a reminder, you will see each person's bio come up on the screen as they progress with each of the topics for today, but in case you didn't get a chance to read all of it, please go back to the event page and that detail will be there. If I may ask for the agenda to be put up for today. So our first session, we will cover up to our comfort break at around 10:10. As you will see, we'll cover some regulatory insights, and then in terms of really going to practical insights around a report. And our second section, which will be post our comfort break, taking us through to 12:30, which we aim to close, will be around various topics around ethics, the assurance response, where does the future go, and some academic perspectives. Finally, what I'd like to just encourage you all to do is engage. That's what the purpose of today is. So please do use the chat functionality to raise your questions. There will be 2 sessions where questions will be taken, and these will be posed to our presenters in the assurance response and the practical approach to reporting, but it's not limited to that. So please do raise questions in each of the sessions, and our panelists and presenters will aim to respond to you in those chat function throughout the course of today. So that's it from me for today. And I think it's more important we get into our first session, being insights on regulatory sustainability landscape. So please, if I could ask for the bio of our moderator to be put up. I would welcome our adjunct professor from Wits University School of Accounting, Professor Yvette Lang, who will take you through this session. Over to you, Yvette. Thank you.
Jyoti, good morning to everyone. So I'm going to try and give you a quick tour around our regulatory sustainability landscape as it stands at the moment. And to help me do that, I'm just going to welcome the panelists that are going to be a part of our discussion this morning. So if I can introduce and welcome Larshni Naidu, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. We also have Sarah McPhail from the SARB Prudential Authority, who's the lead policy analyst within the Policy Statistics and Industry Support Department. And then we also have Kershia Singh from the FSCA, which is the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, who's the departmental head of policy support. So welcome to you, and thanks very much for joining us today. I know in our sort of prep sessions, we had a lot to talk about, so we hope we'll be able to sort of share some of those insights with you over the next half an hour. So I think Imre sort of gave us a good intro in terms of the baseline of the regulatory landscape and how that's developing. And I think we're seeing some movement already within the local markets as well, where regulatory bodies are starting to introduce new requirements, guidelines, standards to really, I think, hold companies or accountable for their sustainability related performance. And I think the regulations, if we think about it, are really also around just increasing transparency and making it easier for investors, customers, and all other stakeholders to really make informed business decisions. I think that's what this is really all about. You've obviously got the attracting capital investment part to this as well, especially with the South African context. And I think even more importantly is that this is all going to require companies to really make sustainability a core part of their strategy, so that we can really sort of see the change that we're looking for to ultimately create sustainable development for our world and planet as a whole. So I think we can get right into it. We've got a few regulators which I've introduced, and I'm going to ask sort of for some insights into where the progress is being made and some of the thoughts about what progress we still wish to see being made. So Larshni, I'm going to come to you first. And I mean, I've just talked about the increasing regulations around sustainability reporting and performance more generally. So I think if you could perhaps just highlight some of the key developments in the sustainability regulatory landscape that people should be aware of. And I think more specifically, as the JSE, where are you at in terms of your journey in establishing the path ahead for listed companies across the different sectors?
Sure. Thank you so much, Yvette. And it's good to be here. I'm not going to cover everything. I think Imre has actually done a really great job in, positioning what's happening from a reporting framework perspective and what various jurisdictions are doing specifically around ISSB S1 and S2. And that is a space that we are monitoring to try and understand, which jurisdictions are adopting, how are they actually implementing and adopting, the both S1 and S2 in terms of, who's being directly impacted and the extent of that impact for companies. I do want to mention the other ones, the other frameworks that we keep an eye out on as the EU reporting standards, because as many are aware, we have a number of companies who have footprints in the EU. We're also keeping an eye out on the US SEC's requirements because, we have companies who have dual listings. And I think the one point I do want to make here is that, we don't look at this just from a regulatory point of view. We, as the JSE, are also a listed company. So what that means for us is we have to report, we do also do sustainability reporting, and we also report against various other frameworks. So there's a few other frameworks I think most people are aware of, but, just to keep a weather eye out on is, the newest kid on the block is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, all the wonderful acronyms. Just from a JSE perspective, sorry, maybe before I go to the JSE perspective, and I don't really want to speak on behalf of Kersha or Sarah, but maybe I'm not sure if everybody's aware, and I know between Sarah and Kersha, they'll expand on this. But the developments from a local perspective, the Prudential Authority has published guidance notes for banks and insurers. The Financial Sector Conduct Authority has put out their Sustainable Finance Consumer Risk Report and Roadmap that also talks about, corporate sustainability reporting. And I think in October, the SIPC has updated the taxonomy to include, the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Taxonomy. So just want to highlight those for, the attendees for the webinar. So from a JSE's position, our position hasn't changed. We engage, we collaborate, we work with the other regulatory bodies in the country, government departments, affected stakeholders to ensure that there's a unified approach to sustainability reporting for the country. I think we're all aware of what our roles and responsibilities are, but we want to make sure that this is a considered approach, that we're all working for what's in the best interest for the country. As the JSE, we have a role at one part of the ecosystem, right? And we do need to consider the ecosystem in its entirety and ensure that it's fair, it's equitable, it makes sense for us in terms of how do we transition and to what do we transition when it comes to sustainability reporting. The last point that I want to make very quickly, because I know this is probably going to be a question, is what does this mean for the disclosure guidance? So many are probably aware that we put out a sustainability and a climate-related disclosure guidance in June 2022. We had started the process this year to update that guidance because when we did put it out, it was based on certain frameworks and standards, but things evolve. The space is rapidly changing. And with the local developments and the local conversations, we've hit the pause button for a moment, just to make sure that, if we do update the guidance, it must have value. It must align with what is happening in the South African ecosystem. It must align to what the other regulators are doing. We don't want to create any misunderstandings, confusion, etc. So for the moment, our guidance is everyone is more than welcome to use the guidance because it still has value. It still supports a South African view around social issues. And it is a space that we are ongoing, we're continually monitoring, and we'll make decisions as things change around the future of the guidance. And last point on it, it is a voluntary guidance. Just to re-emphasize, it is not a mandatory requirement. And we can pick up some of these other issues later. Thanks, Yvette.
Thanks, Larshni. So I think it's going to become clear over the conversation that there's a few keywords here. So collaboration is going to be important across. You can see there's different role players involved here. And I think the other thing is as regulations develop and land, companies shouldn't stand still. We know this is something important. We need to keep on the journey in anticipation of all of this. So just 2 cents worth from me for now. But Sarah, I want to come to you now, and Larshni mentioned some of the initiatives, but I know you've already started steps in terms of setting the financial sector up on its way towards more transparent climate reporting. So if you don't mind, just a quick share in terms of what those developments are. And I guess a question many ask is why climate reporting as the starting point?
Sure, thanks, Yvette. So yes, as Larshni mentioned, the Prudential Authority released in May this year guidance notes for banks and insurers on climate-related disclosures and also on climate-related governance and risk practices. And the PA, as the Microprudential Authority, has the mandate to ensure the safety and soundness of financial institutions, and together with SARB, the financial stability of the financial sector more broadly. So we are a risk-based, outcomes-focused regulator. The guidance that we released in May followed work that we started back in 2020 and an industry survey that we did in 2021, which already at that time banks and insurers responded 71% that they thought climate risks could be material to their businesses. And at that stage, only 28% were publicly reporting the information. And through our industry engagements, there was requests from industry for regulatory guidance to provide kind of comparative transparency, to provide coherence across industry, to make statements in terms of alignment with international standards, and to also just galvanize resources. We know our big banks and insurers have already been reporting for a few years on climate-related disclosures. So our guidance is and went out for public consultation late last year, and there was unanimous call to align as close as possible to the ISSB S2, which had been released. So our guidance is very closely aligned. Where we've done additional aspects, we've included them under additional considerations. And we've given somewhat of a transitional approach in the sense that we didn't include all the quantitative indicators in our first guidance notes, given the challenges around data and capacity. And because we are a financial regulator, the work is around what is financially material and what is a financial risk to banks and insurers. And it's quite well known that climate risk, how it transmits through the economy to the financial sector, both physical risks in terms of droughts or floods, as well as transition risks in terms of carbon-intensive sectors, and how that then impacts on what we call our traditional risk categories, like credit risks, like liquidity, operational and market risks. But at the same time, climate risk has some distinct characteristics that warrant the additional focus from a regulatory perspective. One being the longer time horizon, so the decisions that we make today, specifically around climate tipping points, have implications for the future. There's a lot of uncertainty around the transition, how government policies may change and incentivize different industry and sectors, and also the evolving data, climate risk indicators, and work like that. So that's really why our focus is on climate risk. We do know there is already a strong baseline of broader kind of ESG type of reporting in South Africa through integrated reporting, through King IV and others. So what we have focused on is really climate risk from a financial risk perspective for banks and insurers.
Sarah, so I think it's very encouraging to hear there was almost a call for this sort of guidance to be put out there. And I think an important message from your approach that others, should really take note of a sort of a transitional approach to this, as we know there are some challenges with data and the like in getting on this journey. So I think that's very useful. Kirsty, if I can come to you now. So we've talked a bit about certain types of companies, and I know you also mentioned the FSCA has retirement and pension funds and collective investment schemes as part of the structure that you oversee. And I know people feel that those types of entities tend to engage less with sustainability reporting. So I guess, what is your view on that? But I think more importantly, they still form a key part of the value chain and could be a big influencer in terms of other companies getting onto this journey. So yeah, if you could share some insights around that for us, please.
Thanks so much, Yvette, and good morning to my fellow panelists and the audience. I think it's a really important point about considering the full value chain of finance when it comes to how do you impose these reporting requirements and on who. So the FSCA is the market conduct regulator in South Africa. Our two kind of key mandates are customer protection and market efficiency and integrity. And on the market integrity side, we really examined quite closely what the call for greater information on climate and ESG reporting means for our markets mandate. And I think what is really important is to understand that there are key players all along the value chain that can have some impact on the overall reporting landscape in an economy. So on the pension fund side, for example, we already have Regulation 28 that requires pension funds to consider ESG factors when devising their investment policies. It's very difficult for a pension fund to do that if the companies that they're investing in don't make the necessary information available. Similarly, for CISs, it's, some of or in the asset management industry more generally, it's quite difficult for them to take an ESG perspective on their investment strategies if they're not getting that mandate from the asset owners who are approaching them. And so it's really important to see this as a holistic approach and understanding that all parts have a role to play in driving sustainability and climate reporting. What the FSCA is looking at, quite cognizant of the developments already in terms of the disclosure guidance from the JSE and the guidance from the Prudential Authority, is trying to focus our efforts on the retirement fund space and the asset management CIS space to see what sensible disclosure guidance could be released for those sectors.
We are in the process of drafting that, but what we've already indicated is that we very much also want to align to ISSB S2, which is what the Prudential Authority guidance has aligned to, and making sure that as a country we're moving in the same direction and not adding to this confusion about the myriad of different standards and requirements that are out there. I have to say, I think the ISSB IFRS S1 and S2 has been a significant step forward in consolidating the reporting landscape somewhat. And I think our efforts are really trying to leverage that consolidation and bring greater certainty to the reporting landscape in South Africa. So that's the FSCA perspective, Yvette. Thanks very much.
Good, yeah. So yeah, I think that's some insights to a question I'm going to pose a bit later in terms of, what path South Africa should consider in terms of its adoption journey. So good to hear your views around the ISSB as well. I'm just, while we with the sort of finance related topic, Larshni, I'm just going to ask you, I know we talk a lot about sustainability bonds and how reporting and assurance works within that space. So perhaps just some quick insights into what you're seeing in terms of developments around sustainability bonds.
Sure. Thank you, Yvette. I think, with all things ESG and sustainability related, there is increased attention and focus on the sustainability bonds environment because, it falls under the umbrella of sustainability ESG. So we do see an increasing interest in sustainability bonds, which include the green, social, and sustainability linked bonds. There are more issues coming to the fore. There's a broader range of projects which are being financed. So it's, different types of projects, not just those focused, for example, on, renewable energies or energy security. But what all of this does mean is that there's increasing scrutiny on the credentials of bond issuers, the criteria, all trying to drive greater accountability and transparency in this space. I think most of us are quite used to, when we talk about sustainability reporting, we're used to the acronyms, the whole soup of ISSB, TNFD, GRI, etc. But from a sustainability bond space, there are reporting frameworks, guidance, and verification requirements, to ensure that there is accountability, transparency. You try to limit green, for example, incidences of greenwashing. So most of the global regulations are guided by voluntary principles and guidelines. There are some regions that have more formal regulatory frameworks. And we also see that and the one that I want to pick on, there's a lot out there, but the one that I want to just mention is the one that we use as the JSE, and that's the principles out of ICMA, which is the International Capital Market Association. So they've developed green bond principles, social bond principles, and sustainability bond guidelines. So if you want to list in our sustainability segment, we follow ICMA's principles. Now, there are just three aspects that I just want to quickly highlight out of this that talks to the reporting and the assurance or the verification part. So as part of the reporting, you'd be required to disclose the proceeds, that will be used for financing whatever green projects, whether it has a positive climate or environmental impact. And that's not just a once-off. There is an expectation that you will commit to regular reporting on those actual use of proceeds and that there is impact of the projects that are being funded. From a review perspective, you're required to have an independent assessment, and it's at the start of getting the bond issued, but there's also a second party opinion that comes in later. Now, all of this does create some challenges because it results in costs, because there's costs related to issuing the green bond, but it's also costs related to getting these second party opinions. The other challenge that we do have slightly in the country is that there's a limited number of accredited service providers that can do the second party opinion. I think from a trend perspective, I don't believe, and even when you speak to the teams, that there's going to be a lessening or reduction in reporting or verification requirements. I think it's just going to become stricter around the projects, the issuers, and the criteria, similar to the conversations we have from a voluntary carbon market perspective, in terms of what criteria do we have, how do we ensure the the suitability, the verifiability, the authenticity of those carbon credits. So I think as we see in normal sustainability reporting space, anything related to ESG and sustainability, even in the bond space, you are going to be subject to reporting and verification to greater extents. And I think we just need to be prepared for that. Thanks, Yvette.
Thanks, Larshni. So I think it's important because companies are sort of starting to employ this a lot more in terms of finance, sustainable finance and the like. So just to be aware of that, and obviously coming along with a verification requirement. So I thought that would be a good sort of way to just think about assurance, and move over to you, Sarah, and just, we see many jurisdictions, we've seen the EU, we've seen Australia, they're really requiring assurance from the outset as they put reporting regulations out. And we've heard ISSA 5000 has recently been sort of certified by the PIOB. So what is your thinking around assurance as you put out reporting requirements?
Thanks. Yeah, I think the IASB and the ISA 5000 that Emily mentioned earlier is a very pertinent milestone. And obviously we, as being the Prudential Authority, are not the auditors. So we do look to IRBA and others to kind of implement and domesticate these type of international standards. So our guidance notes released in May stipulated that we don't expect the disclosures to be subject to independent external assurance at this point in time, but should work towards a future state in which external assurance is expected. And that the disclosures should be subject to internal governance processes and controls as is used for financial reporting. And I think we all agree that external assurance plays a key role in enhancing trust and confidence in financial and non-financial reporting, but it also comes at considerable costs, both in terms of financial costs as well as time and resources, and the ecosystem and regulation of who does that assurance. And as we look at we're not starting from zero here. We've got integrated reports, we've got Basel III public disclosures, even the regulatory returns that are submitted by banks to the Prudential Authority do not require external assurance. However, in these cases, the information is reviewed to ensure it's consistent with audited financial statements and consistent with Pillar 3 disclosures. So with climate, we could follow a similar path. Also understanding that in climate, a lot of the information specifically now is around qualitative information, which I think the assurance is slightly different. So we've seen in other jurisdictions, the regulators, not only the financial regulators, but kind of companies more broadly, have options for assurance, for example, just of your scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions data. We also see developments such as the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, which many of our big banks are using, and it's developed a kind of standard methodology for greenhouse gas accounting and different scoring based on your data qualities. I mean, what we've seen already from our bank disclosures is they are using internal assurance, and this is largely our larger banks, but others as well, and also using kind of combined assurance approaches. There is already emergence of limited external assurance on key performance indicators such as total energy consumption or sustainable finance targets, or external assurance for climate-related financial disclosures that are included in the annual financial statements, and particularly then for banks for the financed emissions data. And noting that our guidance notes are voluntary, but we do monitor implementation through our ongoing supervision. Last year, for example, we had 22 board level engagements on climate risks. So although kind of what we say, and we did say in the guidance, they are expected to become mandatory over time, I think there is a clear path. It's just a matter of how we get there and how we do it as Kersha mentioned, and kind of take a holistic approach to it. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. So again, a similar message, a lot of progress and work happening on the assurance journey, but it's not a case of standing still again. It's putting the building blocks into place. So having your controls in place as you start looking for the data and building up your assurance process. So I think that's an important takeaway. I want to come to you, Kersha. Now, when I think about assurance, the conversation often hops over to greenwashing and that sort of thing. And it's not just about your own performance, but I know in the financial services sector, you've got products and how green those products are. And we've seen some sort of issues in the global landscape around some of those products not being put across in an honest and fair way. So what are some of the things you're thinking about in terms of putting safeguards in place against that?
Thanks so much, Yvette. And it's a very important consideration for us, particularly as a market conduct regulator. In fact, the International Organization of Securities Commissions, IOSCO, has highlighted that investor demand for sustainability-related information is not actually being met adequately. And this is due to a number of complicating factors, again, along the value chain. Things like lack of commonly accepted definitions, inconsistent metrics or methodologies, and inconsistencies in disclosures. Obviously, asset managers would rely quite heavily on the sustainability reporting of issuers. And, you know, a kind of fragmented landscape increases the risk of misalignment in terms of investor preferences and the products offered to them, potentially also carrying a risk of greenwashing. And there are a number of factors that contribute towards that, including the myriad of disclosure standards and the complexity of reporting. However, I do also want to make the point that in the financial sector in South Africa and certainly in many other financial sectors around the world, there are already requirements placed on key players in the financial sector when they're engaging with customers, be they retail or institutional investors, to provide information that is not misleading. And I think when considering that from a sustainability or climate perspective, it really does already place an onus on product providers and advisors to be making sure they understand the underlying nature of the products they are placing funds in and the way that they are advising clients. I think, you know, I myself have been a little bit encouraged by some of the efforts or actions I've seen coming out of jurisdictions like Australia, where companies have actually self-reported cases of greenwashing. And this is not because they were intentionally wanting to be misleading. It was due to their own lack of maturity in understanding disclosure requirements or lack of detailed information along the value chain. It may seem weird to say I'm encouraged by that, but what that shows is that these companies are doing the homework to make sure they fully understand these products, and that they are confident in backing up the claims that they're making to their institutional and retail investors. We are looking at our existing requirements in terms of market conduct regulation, how they can be considered from a sustainability and climate perspective. But then also we will be considering if we need to go further in terms of perhaps definitions of what constitutes greenwashing and what any penalties will be. But again, to go back to the value chain discussion, we can't place very onerous requirements when we understand that the overall landscape for sustainability and climate disclosure is still quite fragmented in South Africa, and to place that onus on entities that rely on that information at this stage is not likely to result in the best outcome. So again, it's a journey towards getting there. We absolutely do want to make sure that greenwashing risks are properly managed and addressed. But we will have to progress in terms of the reality of the South African market and what requirements are. Thanks.
Thanks, Coach. And I think the key point coming out of that is just the link to ethics and how companies are self-reporting on issues. So I think that's quite an important takeaway. We have really great discussion and we have come to the end of our time. So I had challenged the panel to a 30-second key takeaway. I think we'll have time for, but some of our panel will be staying on the rest of the day. So questions are welcome in the chat and we'll respond to them across the morning. But I do just want to say thank you to all of you. I've been involved with the URBA and the SAC for quite a number of years. So it's really exciting that we're really bringing these issues to those that have an ability to make impact, to all those on the call. So thank you very much to all of you for your participation, and I'll hand back to you, Jyoti.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor Yvette, and for moderating this panel, to all the panelists from the various regulators for those insights. I think it was really great to hear around, why Climate First came into many of your guidance and where your focus was, what the expectations are around these bonds, and that there really is alignment that, this is a journey and there's a transitional way to get there, and we're in this really together. So thank you for all that information and those insights. Moving swiftly on to our next practical insight session, I would like to call upon Ziniko Nklapo. Ziniko is the Principal Specialist for Environment at Vodacom Group, and she will be giving some of her practical insights into the preparation of sustainability reporting from a controls, technology, and data perspective. Thank you, Ziniko, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Jyoti, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. So yeah, as mentioned, I'll be presenting on our practical insights from a technology, controls, and data perspective, particularly for our sustainability report. So moving on to the next slide, I'll start by sharing how we felt as an organization, the mercury rising in the sustainability reporting space, and pulling off some of the key insights from the previous panel discussion, and what has been one of our key priorities in ensuring that we are able to pull together a coherent, a transparent, and also an accurate reflection of our sustainability journey, and with a specific focus on data. So for Vodacom, our ESG and sustainability reporting suite has always aligned with the GRI, which has assisted us with focusing on impact materiality. And also because we are a South African listed entity, we've also been reporting against the DSE sustainability and climate change disclosure guidance. And then we issued our TCFD reports in 2022, well, our first TCFD reports in 2022, which was really a product of work that had been carried out for quite some time within the organization to understand our climate change risks, as well as our opportunities and the impacts. And now with obviously the TCFD being disbanded and transferring to the IFRS Foundation, we're now in the process of looking at what are the additional areas and the gaps that we need to be focusing on to align further with IFRS S2. And then lastly, as this mercury continues to rise, because we are majority owned by Vodafone, which is a Europe-listed entity, we are also affected by the quickly evolving EU regulations. And within the Vodafone space in particular, has been the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, so CSRD for short, where the aim is to reach compliance around our 2026-2027 financial year. And as part of the CSRD assessment, we've been working quite closely, obviously, with our European counterparts to share some of the, kind of realistic elements from an African perspective, especially when it came to identifying our impacts, risks, opportunities, and now moving on to alignment in our policies and doing a gap analysis in terms of our actions, our targets, and our metrics, which are all kind of components of the CSRD legislation. And because, and I think the previous panel did mention, because the sustainability topic is so broad and it's so vast, it's become almost impossible for us to be able to handle it strictly within the sustainability function in the organization. And so we've really had to pull in functions into the work, who are the custodians of the data, who are the people that are the owners of certain policies, and really the individuals that are responsible for implementing some of these actions that are part of our sustainability and ESG strategy. And some of the, for us, some of the key functions that have supported us include, for example, the technology team, procurement, logistics, our facilities team, our risk team, even our HR and company secretary. And these are all kind of colleagues that we work quite closely with in the journey of implementing our sustainability strategy and our purpose strategy. And with these kind of evolving regulations, there are even more requirements for us to report on more data, more granular data. And for example, with the CSRD assessment that we've been doing, we'll be looking at more than 800 data points that we need to be looking at going forward. And so for us, again, data becomes a critical component of it. So for us, although as highlighted in the image, the pictures and the glossy reports on an annual basis are what we produce, it's really been important for us to focus on the data, because that really is what helps us tell the story more transparently and accurately. And then moving on to this slide, and over the next few slides, I'll be talking about how we are looking at areas around improving our data collection approaches, our controls, our analysis, and even our verification. And particularly from a data collection perspective, it's been important for us to, just make a start from the beginning, and also with the understanding that we are looking at continuous improvement over time. And so some of the supporting elements in the ongoing improvements include our policies and our standards, and these we try and keep updated on an annual basis, where we take feedback from more than 15 countries between Vodacom and Vodafone, and incorporates that feedback into our policies and procedures so that we improve their implementation and their usability at an operational country level. And I think for us, it's also been important to feed into this process, because there are quite nuanced differences between the global north, for example, and the global south. Especially, I think one example that we've had is on electric and electronic waste, where it's a challenge from an African perspective, but maybe not so much from a Euro perspective. And we've had to see what considerations from a data collection and data management perspective we can feed into the policies to make sure that we take this into consideration. And then also establishing ownership across functions and departments has really been critical. As mentioned, group technology for us has been quite pivotal, because they are really the champions that are helping us execute on our climate transition plan. And for example, our national facilities team is supporting us with managing aspects around our water, and also nature aspects. And then again, like regular training, building awareness, ongoing collaboration across the different operating countries, and most importantly, I think for us, has been leveraging technology to streamline the process, not just to improve our efficiencies, but also just to make sure that we streamline our processes. And just to also put this into context, for example, we have more than 46,000 network sites that we need to be collecting data on, energy consumption, etc. So technology has been quite a critical component in this. And then moving on to the next slide. We've also, in an effort also to try and improve our readiness from an external assurance perspective, we've had to really strengthen our control environments, ensuring that within the various functions, there are custodians of data, and there are also the data providers who are responsible for collating the data and the source evidence, and also that there's a data owner who's going to be responsible for doing the checks, testing some of the assumptions and instances where we have to be making estimations to make sure that those estimations are actually of good quality. And also it's good for us from a documenting perspective to have these review meetings and document these review meetings and make sure that all the relevant stakeholders are part of these discussions. For example, for us, through these review meetings, we've been able to close a couple of gaps where, again, due to like the nature of our operations, we've got distribution sites, we've got terminals, we've got retail stores. It's quite easy to miss a particular data point, and it's through these review meetings and having various stakeholders being part of them that helps us to close these gaps and strive for that kind of continuous improvement over time. And then moving on to the next slide. So again, data collection, the review process, and having ownership from a data owner and data provider in these review meetings. And then comes the analysis portion. So during the analysis stage, the principles are really to ensure and make sure that we have a true and fair representation of the company's sustainability data, and making sure that it's not only relevant, it's also complete, it's consistent, it's transparent and accuracy, and that the data is accurate. And these are just some of the few elements that we take into consideration in the analysis stage. And again, technology plays a pivotal role in assisting us with streamlining the analysis process, helping us to reduce any manual or human errors, improve our efficiencies, and also giving us back a bit more time to focus on the important parts around how do we continue to improve, how do we continue to close the gaps. And I guess for us, what has been a challenge in the past, for example, we've had a lot of the analysis being done by the sustainability function, and of course, you only can know topics to a certain degree as a sustainability professional, but we really need the functions to be interrogating the data. So as a sustainability individual, we're not able to do that level of interrogation of the data. And so what we've then done is to really pull in our functions and make sure that they are able to they're able to do a better interrogation of the data, and look at the rigor of any of the assumptions, estimations. And again, that's helped us to kind of improve the analysis process, having these subject matter experts being pulled in. And then on the next slide, again, one of the elements to try and enhance the credibility and reliability of our data is having that objective viewpoint. And I know the speakers before have spoken about this in depth, and I know other speakers will be speaking on it as well. But it's really, again, been quite a key component for us from a combined assurance perspective, using both internal and external audit processes. And, these objective views help us give confidence when we even get to the stage where we are developing our targets, making sure that we are actually quite comfortable and confident with our baseline, upon which we will then be measuring our progress against. So again, this is an important aspect for us in terms of verification. And then moving on to the next slide, and the last component of the kind of data collection and control process is really focusing on embedding governance, and accountability in all layers of the organization, from board level right to functional and department level. And this has been one of our true breakthroughs in certain projects. And obviously, we're consistently evolving this. Again, as the regulatory environment continues to evolve, we also have to continuously evolve and change this over time. And this is just a snapshot that's coming out of our climate and TCFD reports for the 2024 financial year. And for us, I think what's also been critical in making sure that these kind of various layers of management are part of the process, it's really been around from a budget allocation perspective, because I guess once you do have senior leadership buy-in and management, then you are able to unlock the money that you'll then be using to support the actions that would enable your purpose and your strategy to carry forward. And in closing on the next slide, so yeah, for us, I think this sustainability journey continues to be a journey for us. We certainly don't have all the answers at the moment, but we try and work on these kind of small incremental changes, like building these strong and accountable networks to support us in the journey, and continuing to explore existing and upcoming technologies, which has been important for us to try and streamline our processes. And lastly, just ensuring that we continuously train, build capacity of the various functions that we're now working in, not just for them to understand our broader sustainability objectives and goals, but also to be able to then embed all of that within the organization and make sure that all the various functions are able to contribute and support us with the delivery. And yeah, with that, thank you very much. I'll pass it back to Ian.
Thank you, Nico. You have just provided us with a fascinating overview of Vodacom's sustainability journey. We've learned about the company's commitment to climate action, biodiversity conservation, and social impact. Greetings, colleagues. My name is Ian Mtecha, a professional manager within the URBA's Standards Department. A couple of questions from my end, please, Nico. First one, what is an MSc in Interdisciplinary Global Change Studies, and how does it relate to your work in sustainability?
No, thanks for that question, Ian. So the Masters in Master in Science, Master of Science in Interdisciplinary Global Change Studies, it's a WITS University program. I think it's offered by the Global Change Institute. Happy to share a link on the chats. But basically, the Masters looks at like complex understanding of not just ecological, but social aspects of sustainability and the challenges thereof. And against all the other kind of global trends, whether it's climate change or resource scarcity, urbanization, technology and innovation. But it's quite an interdisciplinary program where you do like a mix of not just the sciences, but also a bit of economics, environmental economics, a bit of business aspects. So it's quite a holistic program. And, you know, because of the nature of that, I think it's equipped me quite well from being a mostly well-rounded sustainability professional, not just coming from a scientific perspective, but also understanding the business aspects and also like from a risk perspective and the economics of it. Thanks. Hopefully that's a good understanding of the MSc program.
Fantastic. Thanks for that response, Nico. Then how is Vodacom adapting to the physical risks of climate change, such as extreme weather events, and mitigating its greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, that's a very good question and quite complex. I mean, we have the details again in our kind of ESG reports and our TCFD reports, but I'll try and summarize from a climate change risk adaptation perspective or physical risk adaptation perspective. So I guess we've got like a two-pronged approach where we try and drive adaptation in our systems. And this is primarily through introducing like redundancies in the system. So for example, if a major weather event it's one of our data centers or in a location where we have a data center, and for some reason there is a downtime in that data center, we are able to kind of swivel or swing the traffic through to another data center. So for us, making sure that there is that level of redundancy, and this is not just from a physical climate risk perspective, it could be any kind of risk really, but just to make sure that we've got this kind of continuous connectivity for our customers. And then on the second front is driving adaptation on our physical infrastructure. And I think for this, it's a growing area for us that we are understanding better, we are becoming better at it. For example, with the massive hurricanes that hit Mozambique over the past couple of years, we've been able to embed some of those learnings in our risk management process. So for example, now we use that data and those findings to identify areas where we should be looking at putting our network sites, etc. So it's including some of these learnings in it. And then from a mitigation perspective, so we do have a climate transition plan that's quite well articulated in our climate and TCFD reports. And again, it's kind of showing the different steps and stepping stones that we'll be using not only in the near term towards our net zero targets for our direct operations, so that's our scope 1 and 2 by 2035, but also our longer term net zero target for our entire value chain by 2040. And yeah, our climate and TCFD reports kind of lays out some of the smaller initiatives that will contribute to this.
Fantastic. Nico, we sincerely appreciate you for taking the time to share your expertise and for your dedication to sustainable practices. Ladies and gentlemen, let's please take a quick break to stretch our legs. A slight change to the program in that the tea break is 10 minutes. Let's all be back at 10:30 South African Standard Time for our international guests. Thanks, Nico.
Thank you very much.
Right. I'm hoping that many of you are back from your break. It is 10:30, and we would like to continue with our rest of our webinar for today. As you would have seen, there's quite a jam-filled session for the next 2 hours, and we do hope you will be able to stay with us and enjoy and interact in this respect. We really hope that you've taken some insights from these last sessions and will continue to engage in the remaining ones. In this respect, I'd like to just remind you around the chat functionality and your interaction in terms of asking any questions that might be pertinent to you, as our panelists and presenters will engage with you through that respect. So next up, it's something that is, I think, on many people's minds, the topic of ethics and ethics within sustainability assurance. And in this respect, we would have a video being presented shortly. This would be from the chair of the International Ethics Standards Boards for Accountants, Gabriela Figueiredo Dias. We'd also, in her absence, though, like to congratulate her on her reappointment yesterday as chairperson for a second term in that role. So let's hear from Gabriela through a video. So over to you to play the video, Rudolf. Thank you.
Good day, esteemed friends. My name is Gabriela Figueiredo Dias. I'm the chair of the IESBA, the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, and I'd like to thank you for this invitation and tell you that it's a great pleasure and this is a great opportunity to be here addressing this esteemed audience. I'm very honored to address this first Sustainability Day with such a distinguished group of professionals under the auspices of the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors, IRBA. IRBA has a tremendous reputation for promoting high standards of professional conduct and upholding the integrity of the accounting profession in South Africa. Your leadership in audit regulation, ethics, and professional development sets a benchmark not only in South Africa, but also globally. IRBA's commitment to ensuring the quality of financial reporting and fostering trust aligns closely with the IESBA mission to set ethics standards that support credibility and accountability worldwide. But it's also worth noting IRBA's commitment to ensure the quality of non-financial reporting, sustainability reporting. It's a pleasure to engage with an organization and an audience so dedicated to advance these values, especially as we discuss the role of ethics in the rapidly evolving field of sustainability reporting and assurance. IRBA has also been a significant friend and has a significant track record of collaboration with the IESBA over times, more recently with the valuable contribution of Sadia Adam, our board member. We are very grateful, and I'm personally very grateful to IRBA for the generosity of allowing Sadia time to allocate to the board work in ways that make her a very respected member of the board. Thank you very much for that. Well, I've been invited here to speak about ethics in sustainability information, a topic which is near and dear to my life and to my heart, and one I have been out discussing for quite some time now. Sustainability reporting has become essential for organizations aiming to demonstrate their commitment to long-term responsible practices. Investors, consumers, regulators worldwide rely on these disclosures to make decisions that align with their goals for sustainable growth and responsible business conduct. However, without a solid ethical foundation, the information reported can easily be distorted by conflicts of interest, by inaccurate assumptions, by misleading practices. And that's why this conversation is so important, and why I'm so pleased to speak about the work that the IESBA is doing in this space. So the scene has already been set in terms of standards for sustainability reporting and assurance. Sustainability reporting and sustainability assurance are the pillars and the drivers of a decisive transformation already in course. As in any other transformation, this one will not occur without some ebbs and flows. But there is no way back, and we are all responsible for its success. Despite our efforts, though, the sustainability agenda has not yet delivered, and without additional tools, it probably never will. Standards and regulations are no magic wands for the transformation. It will not happen without a change in mindset, a decisive business transformation and reinvention, and a redesign of the market's framing business decisions. But standards and regulation in this space are a fundamental part of the strategy. All the efforts being done, setting ambitious net zero targets, reducing carbon emissions, improving respect for human rights along the supply chain, and reporting on the progress made may allow for a non-intended result if the information provided is not accurate, is not reliable. It may, on the one hand, drive a wrong perception that we are doing fine, reducing the impetus for structural change. And it may frustrate investors when they find out that they have been misled, that their decisions were made upon wrong or inaccurate information, and make them depart from this project and depart from the market as well. So what makes the difference between success and unsuccess in this project? What do we need to make sure that despite all the standards, despite all the efforts that we already have made and that are in place, what is still missing? And the response is ethics. Ethics lies at the core of ensuring the credibility of this information. It is not just about adhering to standards, but about upholding fundamental principles that foster integrity and trust. The importance of a global and consistent interoperable set of reporting standards to ensure credible and objective information on sustainability matters is fundamental to help avoiding such risk, both on the reporting and assurance side. However, the quality of the information will always depend on the quality of the conduct and behaviors of people using and applying the reporting and the assurance standards which are already in place, developed and published. S1 and S2 from ISSB, ESRS under the CSRD, ISA 5000 recently published by our twin board IAASP, they will not deliver all their value without a proper ethical framework. And this is because we also need the person preparing the information or providing the assurance to have enough competence, for instance, not to have any conflicts of interest, which may undermine the integrity of the work and their trusts, to know how to navigate situations of pressure from the management, from the client, etc. This all makes the risk of greenwashing more significant if we don't address this appropriately. The risk of greenwashing is ultimately a risk of unaddressed bad behaviors. At the origin of every greenwashing situation, you have a behavioral issue, a bad choice that was made by a human being along the process, working in organizations which not always have the necessary frameworks and culture to shape behaviors appropriately. Sustainability disclosures, in addition, leave more space for judgment for the preparers of sustainability reporting and providers of sustainability assurance, more space for judgment than financial information. And hence, it leaves more space for a greater role for ethics to play. The ethical dilemmas posed, for instance, by pressure from the client or the management, as I mentioned, by conflicts of interest, by wrong incentives, etc., can be much more relevant in the preparation and the assurance of sustainability reporting in this space, and hence need a robust and global framework of ethical requirements applying to those involved in such activities. At the same time, the intensive call from investors and clients, as well as from policymakers and regulators, for extensive, in some cases mandatory, sustainability information, together with some business opportunities related with sustainability information, creates the perfect context for the perfect storm. Untested and unregulated data sources, lack of experience from preparers and assurance, but also from regulators and investors, the complexity of the topic, this all combined with a strong appetite for sustainable products and practices creates a very, very particular situation and a very particular risk for greenwashing. So why does ethics matter? Ethics matters because the new standards and regulations already developed and some of them in place are absolutely necessary to define all the technicalities related with sustainability reporting and assurance, to tell preparers and assurers what to do, how to do, which information to use, and etc. But for them to be effective, for these standards to be effective and display their enormous value and potential, they need to be completed with the necessary ethics and independence elements to provide preparers and assurance providers, people, at the end of the day, subject to human bias, with the ethical requirements and guidance that will help them abide by integrity principles, ensuring the integrity of the information. Behaviors is what will determine the success or unsuccess of this big project and of this great ambition. Ethics is a transformative force and a catalyst for the power of reporting and assurance standards. So what's the role of the ESBA in this space? The ESBA responded to this challenge, to this need. And to meet this challenge, the ESBA has developed some standards in close coordination with the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, our twin board. And together we created something which will help the global framework for sustainability assurance and reporting. We responded fast and firmly to the need identified to develop proper ethics and independence framework, not to forget the support and incentive received from some international organizations like IOSCO, FSB, IFIA, and PIOB, among other stakeholders, and set a clear timeline of December 2024. The process initiated in December 2022, the exposure draft was launched in January 2023, and I take the opportunity to thank all of you who responded to this public consultation because it was very, very useful. And the approval is due for December 2024. We conducted very extensive outreach, including 4 roundtables, millions of stakeholders that we reached out globally, and we received significant support and applause from regulators, from the profession, and from other stakeholders. For that, we developed 3 sets of standards: ethics standards for sustainability reporting, which have been incorporated in the code, the extant code of ethics, throughout part 2 and part 3, the YESA, the sustainability standards, ethics and independent standards for sustainability assurance, which are profession agnostic, framework neutral, and designed to address the ethical complexities which are inherent to sustainability assurance. These are applicable to sustainability assurance engagements that have the same level of public interest as audits of financial statements. And a 3rd set of standards to address the use of the work of external experts, which cover ethical requirements applicable to professionals or other providers when working with external experts. So with this, the ESBA standards aim at closing the ethics gap in 2 ways. On the one hand, by completing the standards infrastructure for sustainability reporting and assurance, by providing the element that supports the implementation and activates the effectiveness of the reporting and assurance standards. On the other hand, helping mold behaviors and elevate the ethical culture in accounting firms and companies, contributing to business transformation and to rebuild trust. Our work is now entering in its final stages. We expect to present the ESA for approval by the ESBA board in December, and following certification by the PIOB, we plan to release the standards publicly in early 2025. We are actively engaging with stakeholders to ensure that these standards are ready to be integrated into jurisdictional frameworks early, providing a clear and timely path to global adoption. In adoption to the standards themselves, the ESBA is committed to provide guidance and educational resources to support the adoption and application of ESA. We believe that with the right tools, practitioners, but also regulators can confidently apply these ethics standards to support credible, transparent, and objective sustainability information. In closing, my friends, I invite each of you, whether you are regulators, auditors, preparers, educators, to prioritize ethics in your approach to sustainability assurance and sustainability reporting. Ethics is not simply a nice to have or an optional extra in this field. It is foundational. Without it, our efforts in sustainability risk falling short of their intended impact. Ethics is really the bedrock of trust in non-financial information and it's at the center of the profession's license to operate. Disregarding the role of ethics in the future infrastructure of standards and regulations for sustainability disclosures will mean compromise its success. So I'd like to call for everyone with responsibilities in this field to make sure that the risk of significant fragmentation between different standards in different jurisdictions, in different regions, which does not help anyone, does not help the profession, does not help other providers, regulators, the market, that this risk does not materialize. That we don't stop before the end of the journey and don't leave this building without a roof. And that the great value of the work already done with sustainability reporting and assurance standards is fully displayed by ethical and independent professionals making the right use of global reporting and performance standards. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a good day.
Well, thank you, Gabriella, in your absence, and I'm sure we'll communicate with you that that was a really insightful presentation to really understand why ethics is so important. It needs to be at the heart of the standards and which are used for reporting and actually assurance as well, and why behaviors need to really incorporate these principles so we build trust and success ultimately. Ethics, as Gabriella mentions, is a transformative force and really should be used to ensure that the value is ultimately added within the field that within which each of us work in. Moving on from ethics to the topic which has already been mentioned many times in the earlier presentations and in the ethics presentation as well. And it's kind of at the top of each of our tongues, I think, is around greenwashing and green hashing, and really understanding what this means and what those impacts are. So in this regard, I'd like to call upon Sarah Lane. In terms of Sarah, there we are, is the head of ethics and assurance at ACCA, ACCA's policy and insights team. So over to you, Sarah, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Jyoti. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the IRBA for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here today to speak on the rapidly evolving area of ethics in sustainability. My name is Sarah Lane and I'm the Head of Ethics and Assurance at ACCA. So next slide, please. So Gabriella has kindly set the scene for ethics and the ongoing work IESBA are doing to ensure our ethical standards are fit for purpose. She articulated that ethics is the bedrock of our profession and the foundational role ethics plays in sustainability. So I'd like to build on what she has said and we'll chat through the following for the next maybe 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to start just by looking at our business environment and some of the recent ethical lapses that we're all aware of. I'll then outline what greenwashing and green hushing are. We will consider then how the ethical standards are evolving, as Gabriella has already mentioned. I'm going to look at some recent research we've done at ACCA, both around ethical challenges for professional accountants and ethical dilemmas in sustainability reporting, which I think will be helpful for everybody here. So next slide, please. So let's jump straight in. As Gabriella said, ethics is at the core of our profession. And I think we're all aware of, in recent years, there have been an increasing number of high-profile cases of unethical behaviour in our profession. So I've just pulled together some recent global cases on the slide. For example, China for PwC was banned for 6 months in relation to Evergrande. The PCAOB in the US has imposed almost, I think, $12 million of fines last year for audit failures. We had Carillion locally in the UK. We had the Netherlands exam cheating scandal and indeed the Australian tax partner scandal. So these scandals have resulted in major sanctions, multi-million-dollar penalties and adverse publicity that has damaged the reputations of the firms involved, and some people have even lost their jobs. So what the ethical lapses no doubt do is erode trust in our profession. So let's zone in on what Gabriella has mentioned in relation to sustainability, that sustainability reporting requires a high level of judgment and therefore a risk of both greenwashing and greenhushing. So greenwashing is where companies essentially mislead consumers, investors, or the public about their environmental practices, essentially making them appear more sustainable than they are. They can exaggerate their sustainability, and as Gabriella has said, therefore the risk of unaddressed bad behaviour results. And sustainability disclosures leave more space for judgment than financial accounting, and therefore we can think that ethics has a greater role to play here. So the ethical dilemmas posed can be much more relevant in this sustainability space and create the perfect storm. So behaviours are what determine the success of sustainability reporting, and ethics is the catalyst. This is why IESBA has responded swiftly and has prepared IESA with approval due in December, and which is professionally agnostic and framework neutral. So it was interesting to hear what Kirsha mentioned earlier in the regulatory panel discussion, that IOSCO has highlighted the investor demand for sustainability products is not being met. And she mentioned that the onus is on the product providers in the financial services sector not to provide misleading information, and that perhaps there is a potential lack of sustainability experience, and therefore some entities are actually self-reporting greenwashing. So I thought that was interesting. Now, just looking at greenhushing. So this, on the other hand, is when companies remain silent about their environmental actions, even if they are making genuine progress. So it's essentially the opposite of greenwashing. It's under-reporting sustainability. So obviously, reporting information needs to be accurate and reliable and to be useful for investors. And ethics lies at the core of ensuring the integrity of this information. And as Gabriella has said, this relies on the behaviour of people and the behaviour of all of us. And greenwashing and greenhushing in relation to sustainability do the same thing. They erode trust through lack of transparency in this information. So I thought now we can look at how ethics standards are evolving as a result of this happening. So next slide, please. So as Gabriella has mentioned, our ethics standards are evolving to try and make sure that everything is fit for purpose. So for example, with tax, the global ethical standards on tax planning were established in April. Over the next couple of years, we know that IESBA in their strategic roadmap will focus on a number of areas, for example, firm culture and governance in audit firms, and perhaps even creating guidelines around corporate governance standards, which have been in place obviously in other industries such as financial services. And also they'll be looking at potentially extending the scope of our code to other professions, which will be the first time this has happened. So in relation to sustainability assurance. And then just looking briefly at regulators, the PCAOB, as we know, has made a very strong stand. On September 9th, the Financial Times reported that firms that audit more than 100 public companies in the US will have to set up an oversight board that includes at least one independent outsider. So around a dozen firms in the States will be affected, and the largest US firms, and will have to appoint independent outsiders to help oversee audit quality under new and approved rules by the SEC. So we know ethics lies at the core of our profession and is the basis of trust. And as Gabriella said, it does act as a successful catalyst in the application of sustainability related standards. So next slide, please. So just turning to the global sustainability related standards, they're obviously evolving rapidly. We've already had that regulatory discussion earlier, and there's clearly a lot going on. So for example, we have CSRD, which is applicable for 31/12/24 year ends for entities in Europe. So we'll see the first reports published in 2025. So obviously this isn't applicable in South Africa, but it may affect some of your clients that have related entities in Europe, as Lashni mentioned earlier. So these companies will be required to comply with ESRS, so the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And Imre discussed this in his introduction. And there is obviously a need to ensure consistency and accountability in assurance reports, and therefore potentially a need for mandated sustainability reporting standards in South Africa going forward. So in September, we know the IASB approved ISO 5000 as the framework for providing sustainability assurance, and IASBA obviously has also published IESA, which is the ethics standard for sustainability assurance, and this is due to be finalised at the board meeting in December, as Gabriella said. So look, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different standards applicable in different regions. So if we just take a quick look at South Africa, the IRBA is fully committed to sustainability, as Imre mentioned earlier when he discussed his objectives over the next 6 years. You have obviously got the King IV report, which already encourages sustainability reporting using the apply and explain approach, and of course includes sustainable value creation. So the audit profession in South Africa will contribute to the sustainability of the economy by providing assurance, which creates its own ethical challenges. And that brings me to a piece of research we've just completed at ACCA. And what we're trying to do with this research is understand, obviously, the ethical environment is changing. You've got a lot of new standards coming through, and sustainability is a key piece of that. So what we're trying to do with this research is understand, okay, so what ethical challenges are our members facing at the moment? So to perform the research, we did a survey in May, we did a series of roundtables in June, and we've produced a full report, which I've included a link to there on the slide. And the results have emerged across 5 key themes. Now, I only have 15 minutes, so I don't want to be going into too much detail, but I'll just flag a few really important bits. So just next slide, please. So we did ask participants about what their ethical challenges have been over the last 3 years, so retrospectively. So you can see here 41% of participants have selected ethical leadership and ethical culture as part of their top 3. That's not a surprise. This is an area obviously IASB are looking into in relation to audit firms. And I think just to say, participants did stress the importance of ethical leadership, citing concerns about the potential prevalence of dishonesty and unethical behaviour in society. And this was through our open-ended questions. And you can see there, obviously, 33% of participants have included sustainability. So it's across the board professionally, everybody is struggling with the ethical aspect of sustainability. So members noted in their answers the challenge of operating sustainably, reducing environmental impact, honest reporting on sustainability practices, so talking about greenwashing and greenhushing, and then obviously balancing the profitability with sustainability. So they were some of the examples of ethical challenges that our professional accountants are experiencing. And of course, then we have AI and technology, which is a whole other area, and that's emerged in 32% and 26% respectively of respondents in the top 3 ethical challenges. So again, concerns here are across the profession, and they included ensuring unbiased, transparent and accountable use of AI in decision making. So balancing the benefits of AI with potential job displacement, protecting data privacy and security as AI is integrated, and also using AI responsibly while preventing the misuse. So next slide, please. So we also asked an open-ended question about, okay, there are the ethical challenges over the last 3 years. What are your expected ethical challenges over the next 3 years? So prospectively, and we saw similar themes. So we have AI, sustainability, ethical leadership, fraud and corruption as ethical challenges. And then going forward, interestingly, we have regulatory compliance and diversity and inclusion as top challenges. And I think given the discussion today and even the amount of regulation in sustainability alone, I don't think that's a surprise. So look, there's loads more information in our report, and I'll share a link to it if you want to look at it in more detail. But I just think for today and for the focus on sustainability, it is a key ethical challenge for professional accountants. So that's the key takeaway for that. So next slide, please. So obviously at a time when regulatory requirements for sustainability reporting are growing, my colleague Sharon Mikado, who will sit on the panel for the discussion later, performed some vital research around ethical dilemmas and sustainability reporting. So this guide is really helpful and provides real-world scenarios, so case studies for accountants and non-accountants, to equip them to manage the ethical dilemmas that they face when carrying out sustainability reporting. So it'd be really helpful, I think, for auditors. And it does identify risks around ethics and independence associated with sustainability reporting. So accountants and other professionals, so non-accountants, are involved in implementing sustainability reporting and will and do regularly face ethical dilemmas. So what the guide does is provide scenarios to equip you to manage these dilemmas. So looking at the risks of greenwashing, looking at weaknesses in processes and systems, looking at areas maybe where you could lack technical knowledge, and compromises in objectivity and independence. And we've also provided some practical support through a checklist of questions, which will hopefully drive better application of IESBA's code principles, including skepticism and curiosity, for example. So what we're aiming to do is to help users avoid consequences such as poor quality reporting, including greenwashing, and potentially a loss of trust and faulty decision making. So next slide, please. So I've included here a link to the report and a related video of Sharon discussing the report with her co-author, which we published on YouTube. In case these are helpful, they're nice and brief, so you can look at them quickly. And we had about 756,000 views of the sustainability video, which will give you some insight into how relevant this topic is. I know we have over 300 people here today, so there's obviously a lot of interest on it. So next slide, please. I've also included here some links to some of our work from Global Ethics Day, again, may be very helpful. So we did a video series around ethical leadership. I've included the link there to the research around ethical challenges. And we will be hosting an event next week. You're free to join. It's on the 28th of November, which we'll discuss the ethical challenges report in a lot more detail with Mark Babington, who's the IESBA board member, Pat Barker, who's an ethics academic, and Christina Gutu, who's from KPMG Romania, and she's also chair of our Global Ethics Forum. So you're all welcome to join us there. Next slide, please. So much as I hate to break things up, I'm running out of time. I was given 15 minutes, so I'll just bring things to a close. So we've looked at ethics in sustainability reporting and assurance today by looking at ethical lapses, greenwashing, green hushing. We've looked at the evolving standards. So we've got ISO 5000 and we've got IESA coming through. We've looked at the ethical challenges that our accountants are facing, and sustainability is obviously a huge part of that. We've looked at ethical dilemmas in sustainability reporting as well. So I just want to echo what Gabriella has said so eloquently. Ethics is the bedrock of trust and is at the centre of our profession, and provides a very good catalyst to ensure successful sustainability reporting going forward. Also, just want to echo what Imre said. He highlighted the vital role for sustainability education and awareness. So for us as professional accountants and auditors to upskill and share the knowledge that we build across the entire value chain between both accountants and non-accountants. So sustainability and ethics are areas of change, and I think we can assist in its success by providing positive social impact and help make a difference in general. So I hope you found this useful and interesting from a sustainability perspective. It just remains for me to say thank you for your participation and taking the time to join us today. I'll pass back now to Jyoti, who will introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was extremely insightful, particularly for me, it was looking at what those ethical challenges are and hearing and seeing the research outcomes from what other members are feeling and experiencing. I think it's so important to share that, to be able to actually develop and understand responses. So I encourage everybody to also look at some of the resources out there should you ever be in a situation where you need some sort of assistance to go through these things, or others do as well. Right. The next one is quite close to my heart, assurance, as always. And in that respect, I would call upon Neil Morris in his capacity as a board member of the IAASB. Neil is also a partner and head of global assurance and ESG methodology at KPMG. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Jyoti. I really appreciate the invitation to speak here today. And as I say, in so many of our stakeholder engagements, I mean, these conversations that we're having today are just so important. It's obviously a fast-moving subject, and it's important that these discussions take place to get us all onto the same page. So, you know, it's terrific to be here, and thank you for having me. I think the scene has actually been really well set with our earlier speakers, but you know, when I think about what we needed to do at the IAASB, it was clear that user expectations are higher. There's far greater need for assurance over information, because their decisions are no longer just about being influenced for another point in a rating or for internal comfort. The decisions of users are driving investment decisions. They are driving supply chain decisions. They're driving where people will be working as well. And so the expectations of users have certainly increased. The reporting frameworks that we've heard about, these are far more comprehensive. They're evolving as well. So we're seeing a large evolution in terms of those reporting frameworks. We also then have the regulatory universe, and we spoke a little bit about Europe and the ESRS requirements and disclosures. So that reporting framework now requiring to be used in its full, so it's no longer voluntary, and we're seeing that assurance needs to be applied. So that brings us to this slide. So what did the IAASB do in response? And although our current standard, ISA 3000, has been great, it's stood the test of time. It's been in place since 2015, and it's actually been really good for those that have got experience in delivering sustainability assurance. But given the environment that we're in, it was clear that we needed a specific standard to be able to address the needs and the changing environment that we're in. So in April 22, the work plan included the Sustainability Assurance Project. And quite quickly, by September, the project was approved. And this, by standard setting timelines, is incredibly fast. What then followed is that by July of 23, there was an exposure draft that was put out of the proposed ISSA 5000. And many of you, either through your firms, through SAICA, through URBA, provided comment letters into the IAASB. And we're really grateful for those comment letters that we received. But I wouldn't be worried that this timeline and the accelerated timeline undermined the quality of what we're receiving, because we had great content to work from. First of all, we had ISA 3000. As the first input. We then had the extended external reporting guidance, which I find really useful. That was only released in 2021, and that was the next input. And then we had some recent changes to the auditing standards that we put into the drafting pot, so that we could then align this ISSA 5000 to where we were needing to get to from an improved and more specific standard for sustainability. We held global roundtables, engaged with thousands of people across 6 continents. The 7th continent was Antarctica, that we didn't visit. We received 143 comment letters, which was a near record. I think the less complex entity standards just pipped us to the post. But these comment letters were encouraging. They weren't sort of concerning. They provided some really good input for us to consider and apply as we then finalized the standard. The standard made 3 appearances in both March, June, and July at the IAASB board, and so we continued to get some really good input from all of our board members as we race towards September 24, where it was unanimously approved. So that's the timeline that we were following and some of the process that we were going through. So if you can go on to the next slide, let me talk through some of the key features. And I want to take you up to the heading first. And the first thing is to highlight that this is the first global baseline for sustainability assurance, and it's approved and it's in the market. And the importance of getting first to the market is to be able to limit the extent of fragmentation that we've seen in other areas, to then narrow that possibility down. So we had to get something timely that would then be available for everyone to use. And getting it at this stage really reduces that risk of fragmentation from an assurance perspective. Some of the key features, and we've heard these touched on already, and I'll sort of extend why they're so important, but applies to sustainability information prepared under any suitable reporting framework. And that's really critical, again, to reduce that fragmentation. Some of those reporting frameworks are in play and we can see and understand them, and we have to be resisting the temptation to actually now write a standard for that framework, because there are others that are still in progress, or the existing ones might have further updates or changes made to them. And so we had to resist getting locked into one framework or the other. So we needed to keep ourselves a little bit neutral so that we could then make a statement that this can apply to sustainability information prepared under any suitable reporting framework, again, driving consistency and assurance, reducing the risk of fragmentation. We've heard from a number of our earlier speakers, this is underpinned by ethics and quality management. Not new, this is already in 3000, but we'll touch on a few extra points as we go through this later, but absolutely critical to be able to deliver assurance in terms of the ethics and quality management standards. Then we have limited and reasonable assurance paragraphs. Those are clearly distinguished. It's important that we get this clearly distinguished piece between them, because a number of the regulations are requiring limited assurance now and then reasonable assurance in the future. And I think we've managed to design something that will allow you as a practitioner and as a preparer to evolve from limited to reasonable. And I'm a believer in that we move from limited to reasonable. And so I think it's easy to now progress from a limited assurance engagement in the current year to then see what the differential will be, to then apply those reasonable assurance paragraphs in the future. So those two pieces don't take you down two vastly different paths. They take you on a limited, which can then evolve into reasonable in time. And then it's available to all assurance practitioners, and Imre spoke about that. And there's some complexities. South Africa might have some of its own, and it's touched on as to who's regulated and who's not, and what ethics and quality management standards they follow. Again, I like the idea that it's available. I'd hate this standard to be restricted only to the auditors. And we're going to find that there are assurance practitioners in value chains in various parts of the world. And I'd like to get that fragmentation reduced, get everyone onto the same assurance standard. That then helps us to be able to rely on each other, rely on the work of others, rather than trying to see if you could rely and reconcile back to the assurance standard that they've been followed. But it comes with complexities, and I think we've touched on some of those. Another complexity we managed to get rid of is the GHG standard, so ISA 3410. So that standard has been, it'll be withdrawn on the effective date of 5000, but all of the requirements of that standard have been encompassed into the 5000 standard, so that you can only use one standard to deliver on all sustainability information, and that's really important. So those are some of the key features. Let me delve into a little bit more detail on some of those. So if you can get me over to the next slide, please. The first thing is profession agnostic, right? So we've touched on that already. It needs to be usable by all professionals. So there are a few things that happen. First of all, we try to use plain English. And now we recognize that there are technical terms that are necessary. The plain English helps clarify and improve understandability. It also improves the ability to translate. And it allows that if the standard is standalone, we don't have a dependency on the auditing standards. You can read 5000 and read it for what it is with this application material. So that's really key. I think I've touched enough on the scope of the inclusion of GHG. and at least as demanding for ethics and quality management. I mean, we've clarified those requirements for quality management and ethics. So ISQM1, ISBA code, all professional requirements, laws, regulations that an appropriate authority has determined to be at least as demanding. Not much different to 3000, but I really think that this has been highlighted, and the importance in terms of ethics and quality management has been brought to the fore. And I think we'll see that from a regulatory point of view, this will be a key area to make sure that we don't run a two-tiered assurance environment where someone's regulated and someone's not. Materiality is a topic that crops up all the time. And we've got practitioners' materiality, we've got entity double materiality processes and their materiality levels for what they're going to disclose. So there's been a number of things that have gone on here. Firstly, we spent quite a bit of time trying to get the aggregation level right. So to get materiality for the practitioner to be determined at a disclosure level, quite different to an audit. There are going to be multiple materialities. And hopefully we've got some good application material there to assist those in trying to understand it. We've also got material on performance materiality and how that will be playing out, especially when you start going into a group type scenario. There are added requirements to consider when the entity has a process to identify the information to be reported, and especially when that process might include a double materiality a double materiality process. We've included some requirements there. So a number of pieces around materiality, and I think you'll see some in the implementation guidance as well. We've spoken a little about fraud and non-compliance, so some good feedback on fraud and non-compliance during the exposure draft. So we've added to treat risks of management override. Due to fraud, we've added those. Fraud and no-CLAR requirements have been expanded, so you'll see more there. And we've added to discuss fraud with management and then to report fraud and no-CLAR through to an appropriate authority in your region. Work effort for preconditions. This is an interesting one because there's quite a lot of work that should go in before you accept an engagement, but we don't want that barrier too high and too onerous. So hopefully we've got that balance right. It's certainly been something that personally I've been working to try and get right. We also have sort of lowered the bench a little bit for criteria that are presumed to be suitable. So we've got some frameworks, and we'll get more, that can be presumed to be suitable, particularly when they're recognized frameworks, they're required by law and regulation, they haven't been altered by the entity, and therefore the evaluation of those criteria before you begin in the engagement, they can be presumed to be suitable, and that kind of allows you to expedite quickly into performing the work. If we go over to the next slide, approach to estimates. So these frameworks that I've been talking about, they have estimates and they also have forward-looking information. What we've done is we've combined estimates and forward-looking information requirements together. So we're looking to avoid duplication. I think there are lots of similarities as to how you would be performing your procedures over an estimate or forward-looking information. So you'll see requirements for understanding, including the method, the assumptions, the data, making sure that those are appropriate. And I think the similarities will allow for some efficiency in the requirements there. And we've got some differences between limited and reasonable assurance, particularly in that space. Lots of discussion with estimates and forward-looking information on potential inherent limitations. So you can go and read a little bit more about that too. Groups and value chain. I don't think we've seen the end of value chain discussions and the need for further guidance in this space, but we've done what we can for now. So we've got some clear definitions about a group entity, and clearly standalone entities, even if it's not a group, may still have value chain entities within that reporting boundary. So we try to define group components and value chain components to get that right. We've got requirements and guidance for group engagements, and the use of information in the value chain has evidence. But as I said, I think there's still more that could come in that space, and we'll see what the implementation feedback looks like as we progress. Risk assessment, understanding controls for limited assurance. I think this is something that we've got at the disclosure level. Hopefully there's a clearer guidance that this is a risk-based approach. So we're not taking risk assessment all the way down to a granular assertion level, but it is in place. It's at a higher level, at a disclosure level. And this is one of the areas that will require increased work as you move from limited to reasonable. There's consistency with 3410, and that kind of narrows the range. So we got that disclosure level in so that we could then get those requirements from 3410, and we didn't have a differential as we adopted or removed the 3410 standard. Engagement team, using the work of others. I think there'll be lots of discussion around using the work of others. There's a new term called another practitioner rather than other practitioner. You've got to be careful how that rolls off the tongue. And this really allows us some flexibility, particularly in the earlier years, where others might have provided assurance in this space that you didn't necessarily direct, supervise, and review. The bar is still high as to the work you need to do before you can rely on them. But as we start discovering that there could be assurance that we could rely on, that's already being performed, I think there'll be some useful requirements here to allow that. And then in time, we'll get better clarity around the extent of assurance in the market or in the entity. And we can then make sure that we plan for it and we get the supervision and review that's needed. Increased requirements around connecting with the financial statement auditor. And this will be a space for the non-auditors that they'll really need to start engaging more closely with the financial statement auditor. They're both performing work on similar information at the same time, so their inputs from one end to the other. The reporting frameworks are more connected, and so we need to have that connectivity with the financial statement auditor. So starting off at planning, and then the requirements around identifying inconsistencies that you'll have to talk through as you get through to misstatements. And the assurance reports, increased transparency, disclosures on inherent limitations. What are the ethics and quality management standards you've been following? And from a public interest perspective, the independence disclosures. If we go over to the next slide, there are a couple more that I want to talk through in terms of the process that we're at. So really exciting news the week before last that the PIOB certified the standard. So they've certified it that the IAASB has followed their process. So unanimously approved, now certified by the PIOB. We're going to launch it in January. That'll be after, hopefully, the IASB has approved their standard in the December board. And then there's going to be adoption and implementation with the effective date broadly for periods beginning on or after 15 December 2026, with early adoption permitted. So let's just see what else is coming. And then, Ian, I'll come to you and we can see if there are any questions that we can take. So on the next slide, there is some of the resources that are under development. I think the first one is the 5000 implementation guide. Building it at the moment. The extended external reporting plays a key role as an input into that guide. And when we were writing the standard, there were some things that were in application material. We thought, actually, you're only going to need that once. We don't need it in the application material. So let's move it to the implementation guide. And so we try to get information into the implementation guide that'll be really useful for you. It's getting drafted now, hoping to have it available come that January launch. The basis for conclusion, you'll get some insights as to what we discussed and debated and how we responded to the exposure draft. It's already on the website. Go and check it out. I think it's a really good document. And then following the publication, FAQs, guidance on scope and applicability. There'll be loads. Days like today, engaging with you on webinars, short videos, presenting at stakeholder events, and just direct engagement with as many stakeholders as we can is really what our approach is as the implementation date gets nearer. So with that, let me pause there, Ian, and I'll hand over to you and see if there are any questions that we would like to take.
Neil, thank you so much for that insightful presentation on ISSA 5000, as well as the various guidances that the IAASB intends on putting out into the marketplace. Your expertise and clarity have certainly shed light on the evolving landscape of sustainability assurance. I haven't seen a question in the chat, but I myself have a couple of questions for you, please. Could you please elaborate on the specific scope and limitation of ISSA 5000? Particularly in terms of the types of sustainability information that can be subject to assurance under the standard?
Ian, it's going to come down to this standard can be applied to any sustainability information under a suitable framework. So really important that if this isn't a recognized framework or if it's entity developed type criteria, you apply the criteria tests up front as part of your preconditions. And if you're going to find that it's suitable criteria from a sustainability perspective, you can apply the assurance standard. It's so critical for us that we get that right. That then reduces the fragmentation. We don't end up saying, well, this framework needs a certificate, that one needs an assurance report, this one needs a stamp. We can use the standard across any suitable framework and any suitable information from a sustainability perspective.
Thanks, Neil. There's a question in the chat from my director. It says as follows: what could the implications in South Africa be of also withdrawing the ISAE 3410 standard?
What would the implications be? So in some jurisdictions, we've had a look at whether there are carbon tax legislations that might be connected to 3410. And so if there's a regulation that specifically requires 3410 to be used as part of a carbon tax assurance process, then they would need to have some time between now and the implementation date to see if they can have that regulation altered so that 5,000 becomes the standard. But I'm very comfortable that all the requirements of 3410 have been incorporated in 5,000. And so following 5,000, when it's on the effective date, you will naturally comply with 3410 and a little more. So I'm not aware of a specific regulation or requirement in South Africa for 3410 to be used. And I think that transition to move to 5,000 would then have 3410 coming away, and that transition would be pretty smooth. It just improves the clarity in the assurance report. We won't have an assurance report that says we've done this in terms of 3,000 and this piece, this carbon piece, we did it in terms of 3410. It's an added layer of complexity that I don't think the users need.
Spot on. Thanks for that response, Neil. Then, given the professional agnostic nature of the standard, how do the assurance procedures under ISSA 5000 differ from the traditional financial statement audit procedures?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? So let me see if I can answer this in two ways. One, I don't want to make it sound so complicated that I scare off the auditors. Two, I don't want to simplify too much and I look as if I'm ignorant around the procedures that need to be performed, right? So the first thing that I really like about the assurance standards versus the auditing standards is that you get nothing for free. So from an audit perspective, you arrive and the client says they're performing this in terms of IFRS and you say, that's great, I'm on my way. And you haven't really checked and tested whether the IFRS is suitable criteria. And so from the get-go, you really need to start understanding, well, are these suitable criteria? Can I perform an engagement against this information? That's step one. Another example would be materiality. I don't know, it's not the case, but let's say you arrive in a financial statement or you say, hey, I'll go with 5% of profit and I'll apply that across everything. You don't get a free pass like that. You need to clearly go and say, for this information, what misstatement would mislead and change the decision of an intended user? And that's going to be different for each piece of material disclosure in the sustainability information. So from an audit to assurance perspective, you're going to be tested and challenged each time. Now, a lot of the information is internally generated. There is no double journal entry system here, right? You can't go and confirm it with a debtor, creditor. When the emissions go up, no one upstairs sends you a goods received note. And so you need to make sure that the systems, processes, and controls are capturing that information at the time. So that's key. And so your procedures need to take that into account. Another piece, one of the trickiest things to do in an audit is around completeness. And this is a game of completeness. Generally, and it's not in every instance, but most of them, you're looking to present a better view, and completeness is going to be the driver. I want fewer carbon emissions. I want less water consumption. I want lower pollution levels. And so when you think of all of these different metrics, many of them are trying to present a lower number than it was. And your tests need to be around completeness. And a completeness test doesn't always have that reciprocal population. So that's another key challenge that you'd have from an assurance perspective. But I can go on, I can write a PhD on this stuff. It's really exciting, it's really challenging, and pretty interesting to go and explore.
Thanks, Neil. There is a question in the chat, but due to time constraints, I'll move on. But I'm sure Neil will respond to it in the chat as soon as he completes his presentation now. Thank you again, Neil, for your valuable insights and for taking the time to answer the questions. Your contributions have been invaluable. To conclude this session, I would now like to hand over to Joyty, our program director. Thanks, Joyty.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Ian. I think that was a great conversation and some interesting insights of what is coming with the assurance and what is the expectations. So we've been through a bit of regulation, some ethics around some practical implications of reporting and how it's done, and also then going to the topic of assurance. So what next? What are some forward-looking views around the realm of sustainability? In this regard, we've got a panel discussion that is coming up, and I would like to call upon Shahid Osman. So if you can put up Shahid's bio. Shahid Osman is a partner at KPMG South Africa as a chartered accountant. He also leads the ESG assurance for KPMG Africa. So let me hand over to you, Shahid, to take through us this panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Joyty. I really enjoyed all of the sessions that have been presented today. Really, really insightful. And I look forward to our discussion right now around a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about, which is future-proofing ourselves individually and as a profession, given the sustainability reporting landscape. I've got a really, really impressive panel, and we'll introduce them a little bit later. Before we do that, let's listen to David Madden, who is a director at IFAC, and he'll be talking through some of the research and insights that IFAC have done around sustainability reporting and assurance globally.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Madden. I'm the Director for Sustainability and Policy and Regulatory Affairs at IFAC. I want to thank you for being included in your program today and for allowing me to provide these video remarks as a start to what I know is going to be a very engaging discussion that follows. At IFAC, we have tried to develop data and research that we believe provides our profession with a factual foundation for discussions on policy and regulatory issues related to sustainability disclosures. This data also gives us metrics for tracking progress in the years ahead. Our State of Play research has been a 4-year initiative that examines both reporting and assurance by 1,400 of the largest stock exchange listed companies across the G20 countries, plus Singapore and Hong Kong. All the data that I'm about to present is from fiscal year 2022, which is the latest year for which we have public reports on all 1,400 companies in our sample set. So let's get started with our scorecard. Focusing on the numbers in the purple boxes and looking at the 4-year trend. We see a lot of sustainability reporting, 98%. However, we find a lot less assurance, hovering just over 70%. Assurance does lag reporting, so this gap makes sense, and we do observe a clear upward trend from 51% back in 2019. Audit firms conducted 58% of assurance engagements globally in 2022. That means that about 40% of sustainability assurance was provided by consultants, engineers, or other professional service organizations outside of the accountancy profession. The assurance we found was consistently around 80%, limited in nature, not reasonable assurance, like for financial audits. I believe we need regulation to drive the evolution to reasonable assurance if sustainability information is to be as decision useful and trusted as financial information. And finally, we observe a big difference between accountants who use IAASB standards for assurance and consultants who do not. This gap can hopefully be closed now that we have the IAASB's new sustainability assurance standard ISSA 5000. Last month, we issued another report going beyond the G20 that expands the scope of this research by 20 smaller economies with a focus on the global south. So together, we can now examine sustainability disclosures among nearly 2,000 of the largest stock exchange listed companies across 42 jurisdictions. So we've tried to capture trends in Africa by including Egypt, Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, and South Africa in our research. And the data you see here summarizes what we found in 150 companies from these 5 jurisdictions. Here too, we see a lot of sustainability reporting, 87%. But we observe significantly less assurance, hovering just over 30%. So this is a much larger gap between the rate of reporting versus assurance than we find in the G20 countries. The assurance we find, 70%, is limited in nature. So this is similar to the G20. And finally, there is a dramatic gap in the use of IAASB standards versus other standards, 96% versus 8%. So while some of these numbers look very challenging, this is a real opportunity for our profession in the years ahead. This next slide shows us a country-specific view of reporting. Looking behind these numbers, the data tells that there has been a meaningful increase in the use of SASB standards in the TCFD framework, which supports the future adoption of ISSB standards. This is especially the case we observe in Kenya, Egypt, and South Africa, albeit you can see that overall rate of reporting in these 3 jurisdictions is quite different. Another important takeaway is the change over 2019 to 2022 in where companies are reporting on ESG. Green on this graph indicates the use of integrated reports for reporting on sustainability. Blue indicates the use of annual reports. Overall, if you look at the chart at the top, we see a 10 percentage point decrease in the use of standalone sustainability reports. The biggest changes were in Egypt, Kenya, and Morocco, where the use of annual reports has definitely been increasing. The next 2 slides address assurance. It's clear on this slide that the overall 32% average assurance rate across our 5 African jurisdictions is being driven by South Africa. Assurance is not really happening yet in Egypt, Morocco, Kenya, or Nigeria. In South Africa, assurance has grown from 54% in 2019 to 72%. But as this has happened, there's also been an increase in the use of consultants who specialize in greenhouse gas verification. This is a pattern we see everywhere in the world. As assurance rates increase, it's the verification of greenhouse gas numbers, and consultants are used in increasing frequency. Japan and the UK are 2 other examples of this pattern. So on the next slide, this brings us to who is providing assurance. Note the gray coloring, which indicates the use of other service providers in Egypt and South Africa. The data tells us that in voluntary assurance jurisdictions, other service providers lead to an increase in standard fragmentation. For example, 55% of the engagements we reviewed in South Africa used ISAE 3000 or ISAE 3410, while 45% used other standards. Turning to Egypt, it had the second highest rate of assurance in our research, but none of the engagements we reviewed were conducted by accountancy firms. In contrast, while few in number, the assurance we found in Kenya and Nigeria is all accountancy firms, and they used IAASB standards. When we look around the world, there are 13 out of 42 jurisdictions where the majority, over half of assurance, is being provided by consultants. This is evidence supporting the profession-agnostic approach that has been taken by both the IAASB and IESBA in their sustainability standard-setting work. But who provides assurance is determined by companies and by regulators. So whether accountants or consultants, that this becomes an important consideration when reporting becomes mandatory and then assurance becomes mandatory. Many of you are probably aware that ISA 5000 is a new sustainability-specific standard developed by the IAASB. The board approved that standard earlier this year in September. On November 12th, so just a couple of weeks ago, the PIOB certified ISA 5000 and the IAASB published the final standard. IOSCO subsequently issued a statement of support. ISA 5000 can bring consistency to sustainability assurance engagements in South Africa and around the world, regardless of jurisdiction-specific decisions about who can be a sustainability assurance practitioner. Beyond the standard setting, there is still work to do to achieve the goal of high-quality, consistent sustainability information with assurance that can be widely understood and trusted by all stakeholders. Last year, we published research highlighting some meaningful differences in the application of ISAE 3000 between accountancy firm versus other service providers. We did this and viewed it as a proxy for how ISSA 5000 might be used in the future. The updated information at the far right on this slide shows some improvement, but overall, we believe this analysis demonstrates the important role of regulators and policymakers to ensure high-quality adoption, implementation, and oversight of sustainability assurance, regardless of the practitioner. Performing engagements in accordance with 5000 by practitioners who adhere to the IASBA code or an equivalent standard and who implement quality management standards is important. Otherwise, we risk losing the very trust and confidence of investors and other stakeholders that mandatory requirements are supposed to deliver. If you're interested in understanding more about fragmentation in assurance, including the level and scope of assurance engagements, I urge you to use the QR code and download the full report. Investors and all users of sustainability information will benefit most from a level regulatory playing field that delivers high-quality outcomes regardless of practitioner as assurance becomes mandatory. As a profession, accountants need to engage with our clients to make sure they understand some of the differences I've highlighted on this slide. And we need to do the highest possible quality of work that demonstrates how we as a profession can bring trust and confidence to sustainability information, just like we do for financial information. So I hope that my remarks have helped set the stage for an interesting discussion, and I thank you for your attention.
Big thank you to David. Really, really insightful research and looking into some of the numbers, really interesting to see, particularly from a South African perspective, the maturity in reporting, but then assurance needing to catch up, and then looking at the composition of who's actually performing the assurance and the opportunity that may present itself in the context of this evolving landscape. I am going to introduce my esteemed panelists for our discussion. If I could start with our first panelist, and if we could put her bio up, Sharon Mercado, Portfolio Head of Sustainable Business at ACCA. We then have Bruce Vivian, who is Principal Accountancy Education at IFAC. And we have Mohsin Nana, who is an Associate Partner, Climate Change and Sustainability Services at EY. I look forward to engaging with our panel, particularly given the stage that's been set now, with David talking us through the numbers. Mohsin, I want to start with you, looking at the South African landscape, which we've seen to some extent in the numbers. From a practical, on-the-ground experience as an assurance provider, how do you see the current sustainability reporting and assurance landscape? And given the trends and the trajectory, what does the future look like in this space?
Morning, everyone. It's good to be here today. Thanks, Shahid. I think, we've seen a lot around voluntary, we've heard a lot about voluntary assurance, voluntary reporting. And because, we're operating in this voluntary landscape, we continue to see a wide range of frameworks that companies are using to report on their sustainability disclosures, with, the TCFD coming out and the GRI being, mostly the common frameworks at this stage. And what we've heard throughout the day is, it leads to inconsistency, lack of comparability, and, investors, stakeholders are not really getting that full understanding of and comparability for the information that's being put out there by companies. And, given this growing importance of sustainability, as we've, continued to see, there is this need for the baseline sustainability reporting standard to be adopted. We've seen, regulation will drive adoption. And in order to achieve that, standardized, consistent reporting that stakeholders are looking for. And, you've seen the ISSB launch S1, S2 standards last year. And what we're seeing on the ground is, especially on the countryside, a lot of uptick in countries. In Africa, we've seen Nigeria, they've got a roadmap for the adoption of the standards. And we're seeing that gradual increase in countries, adopting the standards or having roadmaps for the adoption. And from a global landscape, what we do see and what we think will probably be the case is the ISP standards potentially emerging as that, global baseline for sustainability reporting, much like how, the IFRS is now for financial reporting. And locally, what we do see on the ground is growing interest from companies moving to adopt the ISSB standard, although, we're operating in this voluntary landscape, but they are getting ready. A lot of gap assessments happening, and a lot of alignment in terms of, moving towards adoption of the ISSB standards, which is, positive. On the assurance side, we've seen, not a lot of uptick at this stage, but growing. We do see companies wanting to give that credibility to their stakeholders in terms of assurance. And we do see companies now approaching for, how do we get ready for assurance? We don't want to just dive in. It's almost like a journey, that you need to explain. Go through a readiness review. You're not just going to be jumping into assurance. So we see a lot of that happening. One of the challenges is, and we'll probably can touch on it in the technology space, is data continues to be a challenge in the assurance side, making sure you have all the relevant data for your sustainability reporting. But there is a growing interest from companies to move to assurance. And like we've heard, the standards that are used, the audit firms are using ISA 3000 at the moment and 3410, but we also have the non-audit firms, and they're using, ISO standards and the AA 1000, which is, quite common at this stage. So ISA 5000 coming through is definitely a positive step in getting all assurance providers as well to use a single standard and provide that assurance for the future, where we, expect to see enhanced quality and less fragmentation around the assurance process. So lastly, how do we envision this future of sustainability assurance? So there are 2 points. One is, at the moment, assurance is selective, not really integrated. It's specifically focused on certain KPIs that companies are reporting on. But I think in the future, we will see a more comprehensive, integrated approach when it comes to assurance and how companies are connecting the financial reporting with their sustainability reporting. And I also think we'll move beyond just assuring on selective KPIs to potentially assuring the entire sustainability report. And this is really what I think will drive that long-term growth and value that businesses want to give their stakeholders.
Thanks, Mohsin. That's really insightful, and I think leads well as we're thinking about this journey. There's been a number of publications that ACCA's put out, Sharon, and one of those, the Sustainability Reporting Guide to Preparation, highlights how capabilities relevant for sustainability reporting include those related to financial reporting. So as the regulations around sustainability reporting and assurance continue to evolve, how important will financial accounting competencies continue to be in the reporting and auditing of sustainability-related information?
Firstly, well, thank you, Shahid, for that question. And actually, thank you for IRBA for inviting ATCA to speak here today. I think in terms of my answer, I'm going to cover three key things. One, which Mohsin has touched upon, the role of accountants. I'm then going to directly answer your question, how important are the financial accounting competencies and capabilities? And the answer in one simple word is incredibly important, but I will expand on that. And then I'll talk about using the skills. But in terms of the role of accountant, it extends beyond reporting, and reporting and assurance is one part of it. Because if you think about accountants, they're there to perhaps, identify where sustainability-related risks and opportunities are in the first instance, develop the responses, and then indeed communicate them with integrity, hence the reporting and the assurance. And a little bit of digging, around in terms of readiness on these capabilities. Personally, I would say that you guys in South Africa are probably further ahead for two reasons. One, because of integrated reporting requirements that you've had for quite some time. And secondly, around the corporate governance code requirements, once again, ahead in many respects with the rest of the world. And I appreciate integrated reporting is not sustainability, but it does require some similar thinking around material capitals or resources, factors that impact them, and then that concept of sustainable value from creation to erosion. And that means you're thinking about sustainability-related matters of natural and financial environment, people, geopolitics, geoeconomics, and technology, for example. And so on to those capabilities, as I mentioned, yes, financial competencies are incredibly important. And our work really talks about it. I would argue that the financial is a core capability, and that capability is made up of three things: skills, a mindset, and a behaviour. And I think the skills are definitely there, but to be built upon. Mindset and behaviours might require a little bit of a shift, and I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more depending on time. But we have a piece that's launching on the 28th of November. The link is live at the moment because I knew I was speaking here today. And it's around making those information connections, which brings me onto that really important capability. For me, that one big capability is the capability of Maltese thinking. And what I mean by Maltese thinking, which by the way, is something that I have made up as a word. It's thinking about multi-capitals. It's thinking about multiple timeframes, multiple stakeholders across your value chain and across multiple systems. And that also then requires the other aspect of Maltese, which is expanding financial materiality, which we're all very familiar with from a reporting perspective on the financial statements, but to thinking about impact and dynamic materiality, even if you are applying the ISSB standards, because you have to think about how a sustainability-related risk or opportunity may loop back to the organisation. And that, for me, also requires that mindset and behaviours shift, which is centred on principles of open innovation, collaboration and partnership, and that requires a whole new way of working. And I feel that was alluded to many times actually over the discussion today. And then just finally, if time permits, what I'd like to do is just pick up on using those skills themselves. And in terms of using those skills, ACCA, we talk about the broad role of accountants. So accountants in business might require these skills of interconnection to develop and work with